Hello, I'm Chris Holland, and this is Shit You Could Have Googled in 30 Seconds. By now, we all know that Disney has deviated from the source material of its animated films, substituting family-friendly, happy endings for the originals. But why were Grimm's fairy tales so grim? To those unfamiliar, the original works of the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen were very different from the Disney princesses with comedic sidekicks we see today. How different? You might be shocked. Warning, major spoilers lie ahead, so if you haven't caught up with your Disney fairy tales yet, I suggest you go make that happen and then come back. I'll still be here. So, in Disney's Cinderella, our title character is tracked down using a glass slipper that failed to fit her wicked stepsisters, and she finds her happy ending with Prince Charming. In the original Grimm version, the stepsisters went so far as to cut off their toes and heels in an attempt to make the slipper fit, but the blood is pointed out by nearby doves. In the end, the sisters found themselves blinded by the pecks of these justice-wielding doves. In Disney's 1937 film, Snow White, the wicked queen found her fate when a bolt of lightning forced her off a cliff, presumably to her death. The Grimm brothers leave no room for interpretation, however, with the queen left to dance to her death in red-hot iron shoes. In modern tellings of Little Red Riding Hood, Red is victorious, sometimes with the assistance of a huntsman. But in earlier versions, the wolf cooks her grandmother and serves her to Red as a meal, her blood served as wine, an unwitting act of cannibalism. The wolf has Red then stripped naked, throwing her clothes into the fire, where the wolf beckons her to climb into bed with him, and then he devours her. Hansel and Gretel, as we all know, culminates in pushing the cannibal witch into an oven as the siblings flee to freedom. In the original version, they were abandoned by their cruel mother, who, facing famine, saw them as a burden. Lost in the forest, they wandered upon a cottage of gingerbread where things played out as we remember, but after killing the witch, they rob her home of valuables and return home, finding their cruel mother dead and sharing the loot with their kind father. Disney's Sleeping Beauty ends when Prince Charming wakes our protagonist with a kiss, living happily ever after once again. But a far cry from the original tale. In that version, it was a king that happened upon the Sleeping Beauty, and he took that opportunity to rape her. She sleeps through the 9 months of her subsequent pregnancy until one of the resulting twins suckles her finger, dislodging the flax and finally awakening her. The Little Mermaid is a fun movie full of songs and dingle hoppers in which Ariel changes to human so that she and Eric can be together. Not so in the original Hans Christian Andersen ending. Our mermaid sees Eric marry another princess, and in her jealous despair, she is given a knife with which to murder the prince. Overcome by grief, she opts to kill herself instead, turning into froth in the turbulent sea. Andersen also penned The Snow Queen, adapted by Disney into the musical Frozen. Andersen's plays out as a completely different tale, focusing on a boy that gets shards from a broken magic mirror into his eyes and heart. The shards turn to ice, which leads to his abduction by the Snow Queen. His sister, Gerda, spends the remainder of the story on a quest to rescue her brother from the Queen's clutches. Some tales still end happily, but have tons of violence and sex folded in that change the feel of the tale, such as Rapunzel's gratuitous sex scenes and being abandoned pregnant by her prince, Pinocchio murdering Jiminy Cricket with a hammer, or the petulant princess throwing the frog against the wall in disgust until he transformed back to human. Lesser-known tales of woe have yet to be adapted by Disney. The Six Swans sees an evil mother-in-law burned at the stake, while The Goose Maid sees a fraudulent bride stripped naked, thrown into a barrel lined with nails, and dragged through the street. I can only imagine the award-winning song Sir Elton John will compose for that scene. Maybe the little match girl will have an anthropomorphic matchbook sidekick with a silly accent. The truth is, There is no one reason why we terrified children with tales of horror and despair. Some are obvious in their parable, such as Red Riding Hood's cautionary tale against talking to strangers, or Cinderella's sisters demonstrating that cruelness and immorality will never see you through to success. Gerda used her faith in biblical scripture to defeat the Snow Queen, and the little match girl celebrated joining her loved ones in heaven, which is very par for the course for Hans Christian Andersen, always weaving a sermon into his work. Some fairy tales were simply reflecting the horrors of the time, using symbolism to define their struggles against pestilence or famine, to acknowledge social inequality, or to address political unrest at the time. Some are true, such as The Sinister Secret of the City of Hamelin, in which multiple historical accounts mention the sudden disappearance of 130 children, attributed to a piper, possibly symbolic of a plague or a mass murder. Then there is the biography of poor Petrus Gonsalves, born with hypertrichosis, thick hair covering the body, and raised in a cage as an oddity to perform as a beast. King Henry II saw more in him and made him a nobleman, and eventually the beast found his beauty, siring 7 children over 40 years together. And sometimes, people just want a good old-fashioned horror story. I want to thank everyone for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe if you aren't already a subscriber. You'll find the resources and links for this video in the description.